All right, let's move on now to Media Watch. James Creedon joining us here in the studio for a look at how other media, social media, are covering some of the top news stories. James, political reactions in France today to the Brussels attacks.
That's right. I suppose what we tend to see after the terror attacks that we saw in Brussels and other such attacks is politicians trying to come up with responses that are perhaps easy to implement. Obviously, we know that that the problem of terrorism is multifaceted. There are social issues, there are political issues, there are all sorts of questions that need to be looked at. But some responses that are being proposed by the political right, for example, Xavier Bertrand confessing on radio this morning that he would not have voted for the abolition of the death penalty in 1981. I suppose the inference being that terror suspects should be hanged, or in some way, shape, or form. The death penalty would be appropriate. Now, Nathalie Kosciusko-Morizet, who is hoping perhaps to, she's one of the presidential hopefuls next year. She said a life sentence in the case of terrorism should be exactly that, a life sentence, not 20, 30 years and then you end up coming out of prison as an elderly person. It should really be a life sentence. Now, the Prime Minister, Manuel Valls, has suggested something similar, so there seems to be a degree of agreement regarding that idea that life sentences could be strengthened. Now, I suppose maybe the cynic in me is saying, is that really going to resolve the problem? If they're behind bars for 20, 30, 40 years, great, but I'm not sure that alone is going to provide any solutions. But anyway, these are the sort of statements that in France we are hearing over the last couple of days.
We come back to that question, don't we, of if people are increasingly, it seems, ready to become suicide attackers. Would these kinds of things act as a deterrent anyway, which I suppose is the idea behind them? Let's move on to the United States now. James, some people there saying that the attacks in Brussels could prove a boost to Donald Trump's campaign. Can you just unpick that for us?
That's right. Libération, their New York correspondent, has been looking at this question now. What he is saying is you have journalists in the US such as Blake Hounshell. Now, he is the editor of Politico. He tweeted after the Brussels attack saying we could just be one terror attack away from a Donald Trump presidency. Now, what he is pointing to is the timeline here. If you go back to the Paris attacks on the 13th of November, Donald Trump responded by saying we need a national register of Muslims living in the US. After the San Bernardino terror attack in California on the 2nd of December, he took it a step further by saying we need to ban Muslims from entering US soil, which obviously there was a huge reaction to that. People really thinking he was taking it way too far. And now he has spoken out after the Brussels attacks, and he has said really what we need to be looking at is torture techniques such as waterboarding. And if, for example, those techniques had been used against Salah Abdeslam, then perhaps we might have avoided this attack. Now, that is presuming that there's a link between Salah Abdeslam and those behind the attack in Brussels, which is speculative for now. But I suppose some worried that we're talking here about the death penalty. We're talking about bringing back torture techniques. It's a rhetoric.
Is it legal to advocate torture? I'm not sure that it is.
I'm not sure. But in any case, this kind of rhetoric works with a certain part of the electorate. 59% of Republicans support, for example, the proposal of closing borders to Muslims. So in a time of fear, these sort of solutions actually have an appeal for some.
All right. Finally, a Twitter storm. We've had so many, haven't we? This after a tweet that followed the bomb attacks and sparked a furious response online.
That's right. Now, this is a guy called Matthew Doyle who he apparently approached a woman who was a Muslim lady in Croydon. Now, let me see if I can find the actual tweet. And what he said to her, he then relayed to his Twitter followers. I think if he'd have been better advised to keep it to himself. I confronted a Muslim woman yesterday in Croydon. I asked her to explain Brussels. She said, nothing to do with me. A mealy-mouthed reply. Now, he quickly got himself arrested as a result for inciting racial hatred. And indeed, Croydon police tweeted that image of a pair of handcuffed hands. But it did set Twitter alight with a lot of people thinking that it was such a silly statement that it deserved a little bit of satire. One statement here, I confronted an Irish woman yesterday in Camden. I asked her to explain Bono. She said, nothing to do with me. A mealy-mouthed reply, and so on and so forth. I think there was also something about talking to a dog who said woof, and that was also considered a mealy-mouthed reply. Catherine.
All right, thanks so much. James Creedon there with a little levity from the internet to round off Media Watch for today.